the TCO analysis is important when you're determining whether you want to use one of our sensors, another sensor, or any sensor at all. It doesn't just apply to our equipment. This is a general guide to help you determine and maybe kind of spur some thought with you all as to what's important when we're looking at potentially putting a perimeter system out there or potentially making a change to a perimeter system. We like to break it down into 4 categories: acquisition, installation, operation, and change, right? First, you need to figure out what you're getting. Then you need to install it. Then it's going to operate for a certain amount of time, and then maybe there are changes in the future. So the acquisition cost will, of course, entail a risk analysis. You'll need to, find out what the risk at your site is. System identification between different products, specifying that. Sometimes, if you're getting a spec writer to come in and write a spec for you, that's not cheap, and it's certainly not free. So those are all costs that are associated. Some of you might be able to write your own specifications with it, and you might charge a customer to do that. The integration cost on what it would take to integrate what you've got with what you're bringing on, or what you've got with what you're changing to. And then, of course, the hardware and software that may go with it, and training on that equipment. Training is essential in every step of this. You absolutely have to have either trained technicians, trained operators, trained repairmen, trained testers. It's integral to each part. The next step would be the installation costs. Whether you need to make any changes to your physical barriers. You may have a fence that isn't in really good condition, and you're really hard set on, I want to use the brand new fiber optic fence system out there. Well, if you're going to use that, then your fence is going to have to be in a very good condition. Or maybe you say, I really want to use that buried cable system. Let's go ahead and put some crushed gravel out there and make a nice pathway like that awesome Egyptian museum did. All these things are considerations with the installation cost. The civil work. Because our fence sensors pass power and communication over the sensor cable, the civil work to install one of ours is significantly less than many of our competitors. For example, if you have a 2,000 foot perimeter, that's a 2-processor system for us. Doesn't matter how many zones you have. If you're using one of our competitors that has a processor with 2 zones on it, then they have to ask you, well, how many zones do you need? Because if they're only doing 2 zones per processor and you say, oh, I need 20 zones, now you've got a 10-processor system, whereas we've got a 2-processor system. And then you're bringing power and communication to each of those processors, whereas you're just bringing it to one of ours. So the pros and cons to those certainly fall within civil work, power requirements, system integration. And then whether there's factory acceptance testing or not, for us, anything larger than a 4-processor perimeter, we usually tag on a site commissioning or factory acceptance. We have one of our technicians come out to the site. They're going to do a commissioning trip. They're going to visit the site. They're going to look at each of the processors. They're going to inspect the cable, the configuration. They're going to make sure it was installed according to factory recommendations. Many users will want a factory acceptance course. And then, of course, we've got training listed on there because training falls under every aspect of this. You need to train your installers. Maybe you need to bring in some contractors, and they may need training. So you might get your own people trained, but you also might want to build in their cost to get the subcontractors trained so they know how to manage the cable. Even if you're just getting in cable pullers, you're going to want to send them through some sort of a course, send them to our website or something to learn how to pull the cable that they're going to pull on. Operational cost is always a big one. This is an interesting one that we could dive into and be in here for hours, but I'm going to save you guys. I'm going to go over it briefly. Alarm monitoring can be done locally with your own people. It can be done remotely. There are remote monitoring stations or central alarm monitoring stations. And there's guard services that have guys that sit on site and then maybe in a booth or something like that. But all of that costs money. And you need to decide or need to help them to decide what type of alarm monitoring is going to be most effective for that site or for that specific application. This goes right hand in hand with incident response, because when an alarm takes place, you've got to respond to it one way or another. The very worst thing you can do is apply a fence system around the perimeter of a site and have one guard sitting at the front of that site that has a golf cart that he's going to jump in and go respond to an alarm when it happens. Imagine it's 2:30 in the morning. An alarm takes place and He's going to walk out there, get in his cart, and drive around to the back of the site. He's going to look around and say, nothing happened. It's a nuisance alarm. I'm getting nuisance alarms. Goes back to his thing, logs his nuisance alarm, and now you've got a fence system that doesn't work. Even, there may be someone on site, there may not. You never know. So we want to tie these things to CCTV systems. We want to be able to manage the incident response appropriately to the site. A remote substation is going to have a very different incident response than the local gold bullion repository, right? Hopefully. Fault analysis and repair. I like to believe that our systems are way ahead of the curve, or way ahead of the field when it comes to fault analysis and repair. However, some people might beg to differ. And this is something that you definitely want to evaluate when you're looking at your operational costs. How long is it going to take a technician to evaluate something that's happening on the perimeter and fix it? Do we need to worry about fusion splicing? Am I concerned with a zone? Am I able to just repair or splice a cable, or will I need to completely replace? That goes with maintenance. And power usage, I'm not really sure. You guys tell me. This is something I like to poll the crowd on. When we're looking at operational costs, do you guys calculate power usage into it? I mean, are you concerned with how much power the system's using?
Only when failure.
Okay. So you guys have battery backups and generator backups and all that stuff that you have to account for, which takes fuel and manpower and support equipment, which you have to account for, right? Yeah, exactly. So, when we're looking at sites, some site may already have that inherently built in, but your site, you may need to take an account for all that and then build that into the total cost of the system. Then you've got to make sure that everybody's trained on that stuff. Not just the perimeter system, but also all the support equipment that go with it, right? And then the operators that are operating these systems to go with it, right? So many of these items that we've been talking about are fixed. Fixed power locations, fixed points of communication, fixed battery backup, fixed zones. But what happens if you need to make some changes? Say your budget in 2010 was this big, and you installed just enough to get you up and running. You've got a 4,000 foot site, perimeter, you've got 5 zones. Good, you got the box checked, we got security. Regulators come down and they say, all right, it's 2017, what have you done to upgrade? Let's see what you're doing to get up with the times. You say, well, I've got a security system. And they say, well, now you need 50-foot zones. Now we need dual layer protection. Now we need more cameras and better cameras. When we're looking at the potential change costs for these systems, the first thing that we look at is it flexible in zoning? Can you adjust the zones? Because if we can't adjust the zones, then adding more cameras really isn't going to do much to it. Because all the cameras are manually operated, and you can't tie, or you can tie multiple cameras to a zone, but you still have that one long zone. A 1,000-foot zone is hard to see, even if you've got 4 or 5 cameras looking at it. So change cost goes in here as always as an afterthought, but should be brought in right at the beginning of these discussions. Is the perimeter flexible? Can we add zones? Can we make takeaway zones? Can we change these things or potentially upgrade to integrate to new independent platforms in the future?
So if you know that you have a loss every year of, let's say it's copper theft of $10,000 a year, that plays into your total cost of ownership if you prevent that theft, right?
Sure.
Can you speak to that just for a couple seconds?
Sure.
And as well as brand, value of someone's brand if that's impacted by an incident.
Sure. Matt brings up a good topic here as to the value of a perimeter security system and how that might affect your total cost of ownership. We did a case study a few years ago with a local electric company, and the electric company was losing about $50,000 a year in copper theft. And what we did was we applied the fence-mounted sensor at roughly $10 a foot. That was what their cost ended up being for the size of their perimeters, which in total with installation on these 2 sites was about $150,000. And they were losing about $50,000 a year. But within the first year, they had apprehended 3 people, 2 internal employees that were helping to steal the copper from these sites. And what they were doing is the people would come in, they would cut the ties on the bottom of the fence, and then they would go away. And then another group would come in and they would lift the fabric and go under and be on site working to remove the copper ground rods. And they were compromising the ground grid on these sites. They'd remove these ground rods and they'd come back, go under the fence, throw them in the back of the truck and take off. And they would do this. They would hit random sites in these remote areas. So we covered these 3 sites at about $150,000 total. And within the first year, we had apprehended these 3 suspects, completely eliminated their copper theft issue within 12 months. So if they're looking at losing $50,000 a year, within that first year, they spent $150,000. You can imagine how quickly they recoup that money if their copper theft issues just immediately stopped.
When I think of brand from an end user's perspective, let's just say we are Deer Park or one of the other 1,000 water resellers, right?
Yep.
You have a lot of options, Aquafina, and everybody probably has their own favorite, Fiji and whatever. When I think of brand impact on an end user, it is that someone got into the production facility at Deer Park and caused some sort of contamination or whatever it is, and now their brand, Deer Park's brand, is either reduced or decimated because I can go buy Aquafina, I can go buy Fiji, I can go buy whatever else.
Yeah,
and now and then you think about with airports, right? If an airline company doesn't protect their fleet as well as another one, and something happens to Delta or American or Southwest, you know what? I'm just not going to fly there anymore.
The perfect example for you is web hosting and data centers. That's the perfect example for what you're talking about as far as brand recognition and brand safety and security to the public eye. How many people stopped using the Target credit card when Target got hit and they said, oh, we released all the user information? A lot of people got paranoid and stopped using their card, right? Well, it's similar to that with when we talk about data hosting and web services. If you have a company that's hosts their data in the cloud, that's happening at a data center somewhere. There's a data center out there that has a perimeter fence and has a building full of servers. And those people want your business. They want to lease out that data infrastructure. They want to lease out that server space. And we can help them better brand themselves or better advertise their security at their sites by saying, yes, we are a web host, high security facility. We have perimeter intrusion detection sensors along with perimeter CCTV, building access control, personnel control within the building, along with guard services, and we maintain correct control of our property. So all of those kind of things will help build that, help them advertise that, and promote them as a more secure for you type business.
Right. So when you do your real total cost of ownership analysis, that's the part that you don't know, right?
Yep.
What is their marketing department value in the brand? And
exactly.
And it's really hard to tell when they have an incident of this importance or this impact that's going to reduce the brand by this.
And what you just said was key. Many people that we sell equipment to have said, no one's died, nothing major's happened. Why do we need a perimeter security system? So we like to think of these 4 items as the primary thoughts when you're looking at either upgrading your perimeter system or implementing a perimeter system. And when we look at the total cost of ownership for MicroPoint, MicroTrack, and microwaves in particular, we use this as a value proposition. So our intelligent sensors, the value proposition is that we have reduced acquisition costs. Our systems are less expensive as a whole than the majority of our competitors because we're using less equipment on site. Our systems use less infrastructure. That means less civil work. That means lower expenses for installation. Because we have the ability to see independent cells, the troubleshooting is easier. The technicians are more efficient. The repair costs are down because we have less equipment on site. Simply and effectively, the systems can change. They are flexible. They are easy to troubleshoot, easy to repair, and with less equipment on site, you're buying less gear that has less chance for failure. That's less equipment you have to stock. everything, all of it, every single topic on there results in a better value proposition. You're getting a better bang for your buck.